Everybody, today we're going to go over Enums and Unreal Engine C++. Now let's jump right into it. We're going to start by creating the interact method. We're going to do that down here in protected. So it'll be void interact, and we're going to have it pass in a actor pointer of the interacting actor. And while we're not going to use it here, it's useful for future endeavors. That way you can say, hey, is the interacting actor the player or an AI or whatever in the future. All right, so let's just generate that in our CPP file. And now the next thing that we'll want to do is actually create the enum and start populating things. So we're going to start with a uenum, give it a blueprint type. Okay. And then we will give it, then it will be enum and then class eDoor state. And it will be of type uint8 because it's always uint8 in Unreal. If you're using regular C++, you don't have to use a uint8. You can use a uint of any size. Now you do want to stick with a uint, which is an unsigned int, meaning that it can't go below 0, but it can go up to a much higher number. So 8 to the power of 2, which is minus 1, which is 255. All right, so we'll start by naming out the different states that we want to be able to put our door in. So we've got closed, right? We have opened, so open. We have opening, closing, and that's really the only 4 states that I can think of at the moment. All right, so if we want to assign these very specific values, we can, right? Like we can do 1, right, 0. We could do a hexadecimal one. In this case here, because in an upcoming video I want to go over bit flags, I'm going to start by just giving these a binary representation of the number that I want them to be, so it's easier to visualize later. So I'm going to use 0b for binary, and we're going to give it 4 decimal places because it's easy to remember. It's easy to visualize 4 decimal places for what we've got here. That means that the first decimal place will always be a 0. Just find it looks a little bit cleaner. Then we'll come over here. 1 and 0 be 0, 0, 1, 0. Let's give this one more space. Then we're going to do there. Okay, so you can see where this is kind of going, right? The 0 bit here will always be closed. If the 1 is set, it'll be open. If 2 is set, it will be opening. And if 4 is set, it will be closing. All right. So let's also give these meaningful names so we can actually pull directly from it and not just have to remember, hey, this is closing, this is opening kind of thing. Like if we want to be able to just print out what it is and we don't know, we can just have it to print the actual display name, right? So we're going to use a umeta display name. So umeta the display name equals closed. You'll notice that it's auto-populating some of this stuff for me. That's just because I've installed ChatGPT, or sorry, Copilot. Right, and we can just copy and paste these in, right? Now we'll just change these to their meaningful names that we wanted to give them. And then what we can do is we can also just give this a the name here, right? So this would be 0, right? This one here would be, oops. This one here would be 1, and oops. This one would be 2, and this one would be 4, being the binary numbers. And what this allows us to do is if we take 2 and 4, and we add them together, we get 6, which is represented by uh, 0, 1, 1, 0, right? So we can do binary bitwise, what's called bitwise operators on them later. Like I said, we'll get to that more a little bit in the next video. All right, so we're gonna put these in protected. And we don't actually need to be able to access these from blueprints, so we can forego having a U property attached to them and stuff like that. But if we wanted to, we could. We could do U property. We might as well edit anywhere. Blueprint, read write. And we can give it a category of door. Now we would need an E door state, right? And this is setting the type, and then we're going to call it door state. And then we're going to predefine it as E. You can do this though. E door state closed, right? Now it will default to closed. If you needed to have the door start open, we could set it to open here as well. Or if you wanted to set it at a specific angle and have it set to opening or closing, we could do that as well. So we're going to start it with closed because that makes the most sense for what we're doing. And here we can see how this is starting to work, right? So we use the E door state, right? Which is saying, and then because this is a class property, right? We use the double colons rather than the arrow or the dot. And then we just say, hey, which one do we want? Do we want closed state? Do we want open state? Do we want opening or closing state? Now these can change, right? Like I could change this to be 0 and 1. And now anything that's flagged as E door state closing automatically switches from being 4 to being 8. And that's just the integer in question, right? So we leave it at closing, and then we can come over here to the interact, and what we're going to do is say, if the door is open, right, and we interact with it, we want it to go to closing. If it's closed, we want it to go to opening. If it's opening, we want it to be switched to open when it's finished and closed when it's finished with the closing state, right? So what we can do to make this easier, instead of having a bunch of different if statements, what we can do is we can do what's called a switch. All right. And what this does is it just says, hey, which one of it is are we in? And it only does one check and then jumps to a position in memory. So we can do switch, and then it will be E door state. And, oh, sorry, not E door state. Door state, right? And switches here, you need to use an integer, and that's why we're going to use an enum. It's one of the reasons why we can use an enum here. So here we're going to say switch door state, and then we do case, and then we give it the case that we want to look for. In this case, we're going to say E door state closed. And then we use a colon instead of braces for this. And it's very important that we add a break, because if we don't add a break here, what will happen is it will cascade down to the next one, right? And we can see how this would work here if we say open, right? Now, if we didn't have the break and we did something like this, door state equals E door state opening, right? Then we didn't have this break, and then we did door state equals E door state. Oh, sorry, this is be opening. The other one would be closing, my bad. Oh, no, this would be opening. Sorry, this one would be closing. Yeah. Anyways, so if we didn't have a break like I've got here, like what we have right here, what would happen is if we came in and door state was equal to closed, it would execute an update to opening, and then it would also execute an update to closing. And then by the time we got down here, now and to the end here and finished running this, we would be in the closing state, even though that's not where we want to be. We want to be in the opening state. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a break. Another thing that we could do here is add a return. But that would exit out as soon as we hit the return, and we'd no longer be in the interact function anymore. And what we want to do is add a print to the end of this, so it prints to the screen our current state. So to do that, we're going to use a break, which says, hey, leave the switch, we're done. You can do the same with a for loop or an if statement. You can break and it exits the current scoping. Okay, so here we're going to say door state opening, and then door state will equal to door state open. Case door state closing. We'll then do door state equals door state closed. And again, we want to make sure that we have this. And then if we had other states that we could possibly be in, we would want to have a default. And we can do that just by this. And then we would put any logic that we wanted here. And then if our door is in any state that's not that, then we would run it here. But since there's only 4 states that we can ever be in, we're safe to do this. Okay, so now we want to add in the on-screen debugging. So that's going to be G engine. And we're going to use a pointer here because G engine is going to be, G engine is a pointer, so we're going to use the arrow key, the arrow notation. And then we'll do add on screen debug message, And then we have a couple variables here. The first one will be the index of where we want it to be on the screen, kind of thing, like the layer. So we're going to do -1, so it's always on top. Then it needs a time to display. We're going to say 4 milliseconds. And 5 milliseconds. And then we're going to give it a color. In this case, this isn't a error, so red is not appropriate. Let's give it something like, I'm going to use yellow. Yellow is usually reserved for warnings, but in this case, let's just use yellow because it stands out a little bit more on our current backdrop. Now, I want to format this so we have the state itself. And what we're going to do to do that, we're going to do an F string. And then again, because we're accessing a static property, our class property, we don't need a instance of it. We can use the double colons. We're going to do printf. And now printf gives us 2 values that we're going to pass into 2 arguments. We're going to pass in text of door state and then %s for string. Okay, and then we're going to dereference an enum, get, I didn't do that, a enum, get value as string, and then we're going to pass in door state because that's our enum, and then just add the colon there. Now that we have the interact method created, let's add in a static mesh and a uBox component that's going to be a trigger for us. So we're going to do that right here under protected. We're going to do uProperty. Actually, we can just copy this here because this is kind of what we want anyways. And we're going to say class t object pointer, and then it's going to be uStatic mesh component. And we're going to call it door mesh. Then we're also going to need one more here. So I'm just going to copy and paste since it's mostly the same. Then we're going to do uBox component. And we're going to call this one door trigger. There we go. Now we'll need one other thing here, and we're going to need a u function for us to bind to the on begin overlap that we're going to use the door trigger for. So we're going to come down here to protect it. And I'm just going to do this just below begin play here. This will be a U function. Because we're binding it, it does need to be a U function. And then we're going to give it the class of void on begin overlap event. And this is going to take a number of arguments. It's going to be a U primitive component, and it's going to be a pointer, and it's going to be the overlapped component. Then we also need an actor component. Or sorry, an actor, and it's going to be other actor. Then we've got another primitive component, which would be the other component. We need the body index, the sweep. Most of this we're not going to use, and this wraps up everything that we need. And then we will just come here and generate the definition. And let's add these in up here. Oops, a little bit higher than where I had it. Because it doesn't like it with that being what it is. New box component. Here we go. And now we can get rid of the class. All right. And now, since this is being generated, all we want to do here is actually just call this interact here. So interact, and then we'll pass in the other actor. And that's all this needs to do here. And then in the initializer for the door, right, we're just going to add in the scene component. We're going to add in a scene component as the root, and then we're going to create the door mesh and then create the trigger. So to do that, it's just going to be, we're going to call it root component. And then we're going to use create default sub-object. And this is going to be a U scene component. We're going to give it the name of scene component. Then we're going to set root component to the root component. Okay, and this can really be named anything that you want. And then we're going to have a door mesh. We're going to create the door mesh, sorry. And again, create default sub-object. And this is going to be a U static mesh component. Text door frame. Or door mesh, depending on what you want. So let's call it door mesh just to keep with consistency. Okay, and then this we're going to attach to the root component here. So this would be door mesh set up attachment to root component. Then we've got the door trigger. And the door trigger is going to be create default sub-object again. And here we're just going to use uBox component. And it's going to import the component box component here. It should do that automatically or prompt you to do it. If it doesn't, you'll need to type it in manually. And then we're going to give it a text, and it's going to be door trigger. And now we need to add the door trigger to the attached components. So I'm going to do it on the root component here, and then they'll sit next to each other. We'll need to resize it anyways. And then we'll need to do the overlap, which will be door trigger, and then it will be on component begin overlap dot add dynamic. Now, because this is a delegate, right, we can use the dot operator because it's not a pointer. It's an actual reference directly. And then here we're going to say this, which is who's calling it essentially. And then we're going to give it the begin overlap event that we created earlier. And this this here requires that it takes certain arguments in, and that's why we had this long list of arguments that we're not actually going to be using. Also, why we're creating this little buffer, because if we wanted to, we could create this as a public method and have it called from anywhere. Whereas if we had it here, we'd have to pass in all this extra information that's irrelevant to what's going on. Okay, so now if we run this, when we come in, we can set up a blueprint that has everything in it that we need and have that trigger as we walk through the door. Okay, so now that the editor is open, we'll just want to come in, we'll go to third-party blueprints, and we're just going to right-click and create a new blueprint class. From here, we're going to type in door, and it's going to pop up with IT door base, which is what we've called ours. We're going to select that, just click select, and then we'll call it blueprint, so BP, and then we're going to call it door. And then we can open this up, and when we open it up, we'll have all of like the door mesh, the door trigger, and all of that already set. So what we can do is we can come up here. I've already imported a door and set it up. So if there's a door that you want, feel free to bring that in. Or you can just really be any object you want. So what we're going to do is we're going to move this up here so it's about halfway, and then I'm going to resize it to fit the area that we want. This looks about good for my door. We can compile and save. Now, if I just drag this here door directly into the editor, or sorry, the world, we can hit play, and as we walk through the door, you'll see that our begin overlap is changing between the different objects, or sorry, the different states. And everything just works. All right. Well, thank you for watching. And if you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe, and comment if you have any suggestions for future videos. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.